This is not shoes. You cannot say that this is shoes. This is clomps. Okay, we talk about this in another video. Goodbye, clomps. That was so stupid. Okay, hi everyone, this is Harrison. I had a couple ideas for an intro and then I forgot that I bought those clomps. So I decided I have clomps. They're pretty comfortable. I hate to say that, but I like them a lot. They're very funny and I like them, and don't tell me that they're stupid. You're stupid. Okay, so actually I was gonna do originally a shoe review video where I was gonna talk about a pair of shoes that I got recently. Yesterday I had to go to the mall and there was this man in the mall who worked at a department store who was talking about shoes. And in this particular store, they sold Cole Haan, they sold Johnston & Murphy, and they sold Allen Edmonds. So, you know, big names in American department stores. And this man was talking about how he really enjoys the Cole Haans that he already has. And the man working at the department store said, why don't you take a look at Allen Edmonds? Allen Edmonds are Goodyear Welted. A Goodyear Welt is like the Cadillac of shoes. This is what he said verbatim. Verbatim, he goes, a Goodyear Welt is like the Cadillac of shoes. A Goodyear welted shoe is like the Cadillac of shoes. Something like that. The Cadillac of shoes. And I'm sitting there looking at bed sheets and I'm like that. I'm like looking at him. It's like, you know, when you see someone wearing Crocs at a nice restaurant, you're like, I was like that. So anyway, that ruined my day. And I decided I would come home and I would talk about shoe construction and some myths. So I'm going to start with this pair of Johnston & Murphy Conards. And this is one of my first pair of shoes ever. I got these when I first started my job like 6 years ago, and I still have them, but I have babied the crap out of them. I take care of them. I condition the leather often, as much as I don't actually believe that the leather accepts the conditioner. Long story short, these shoes are cement constructed. So the sole is cemented to the upper. There are faux stitches, these are fake stitches on the bottom of the shoe, which I find to be a little bit deceptive because someone might look at this and go, oh, it's Blake stitched, which we'll talk about later. When in reality, the shoe is very much constructed, cemented. I took it to my cobbler. I had another pair of Conards that was falling apart, and he looked at me and he's like, it's not worth resoling these. Just get another pair of shoes. And that was one of the first things that got me into constructing, or that's what got me into quality constructed footwear. That's it. So basically, a cemented shoe is when you have the upper and the insole at the footbed, and the sole is just glued right on. In some cases, in dress shoes, that's not necessarily a bad thing, right? If you don't wear dress shoes, if you never wear dress shoes, if you wear them like once a year and you just need a shoe, something like this is probably going to fit your bill. The reason why I say that is because there's practically no break-in involved with these. Is you put the shoe on and the shoe is flexible, the shoe is easy to wear. And the shoe's pretty comfortable right out of the box. There's a lot of foam, there's a lot of stuff in the inside of the shoe that makes the shoe comfortable right out of the box. Over time, a lot of that stuff starts to compress, it doesn't really handle absorbing moisture well, and it starts to get stinky. So for people looking for longevity, I would never suggest a cemented shoe. It's just not worth the investment. If you don't really give a crap, if you just need a pair of dress shoes for a job interview and you just don't care, a pair of cemented shoes will probably fit the bill and it'll probably save you a whole lot of money. With very minimal care, you know, just like don't throw them in your closet, at least let them sit on the sole like that. Don't just like throw them in your closet like that or like this. Like take care of your shoes, and a cemented shoe is fine. So, okay. That was fun. I should throw my shoes more often. Okay, so here we go, talking now about the 3 big construction methods that you'll see in quality footwear. Here we have a pair of Blake Stitch shoes from Emilio Franco. Here you have a pair of Allen Edmonds Strandmocs, and then here are the pair of Viberg service boots that I reviewed for my first ever shoe review. So a little bit of a throwback. So I'm going to talk about this pair of Blake Stitch shoes first. First of all, what is a Blake Stitch? A Blake Stitch or a McKay Stitch, M-C-K-A-Y, depending on where you are, just means that the sole is stitched to the upper and the footbed. However, the stitching of the sole, see this stitching channel right over here, if you look inside of the shoe, I'm not going to turn it around and show you, mostly because last time I did that, someone was like, you can't see inside the shoe. So anyway, you can actually look inside of the shoe and see the stitches from the outsole in the footbed. These are functional stitches attaching the outsole to the footbed, therefore attaching the sole to the upper. So when the sole starts to wear down and thin out, and you go to a cobbler, when they go to replace the sole, they take this sole off, they get rid of all the stitches, and then if they have the correct stitching machine, that's kind of iffy, and that's why a lot of people are hesitant to buy Blake Stitch shoes right off the bat. But if the cobbler has the right equipment, what they do is they take the sole off and they just stitch a new sole onto the upper, right? The leather upper is going to look better over time. It'll maintain its shape if you know how to take care of it properly with shoe trees, brushing, conditioning, all of that stuff that helps maintain a leather upper. When the sole runs out, you just go to a cobbler and you get a new sole stitched directly into the footbed. That's a Blake stitch. We can talk about Blake rapid stitching another time if people like this style of video. But at the end of the day, that's really what a Blake stitch is. Now, a lot of people have this misconception that a Blake stitch is worse than a Goodyear welted shoe or a properly stitched down shoe. And that's not necessarily true. It's just different, right? Like someone might say that a Goodyear Welt is the Cadillac of shoes. Like that just like you hear that and you're like, that doesn't make sense. So when someone says a Blake stitch is worse than a Goodyear Welt, it also doesn't make sense, right? What makes a shoe objectively worse than another shoe is it's nuanced, right? Like if you work in a factory versus if you work like me in an office, like we need two very different things. If you live in a very dry part of the world and you want something that's very sleek and very stylish, a Goodyear Welt could fit the bill. But what makes a Blake stitch so valuable for a lot of people who are especially more style focused is because there's no functional welt that goes around the shoe. Some Blake stitch shoes have a fake welt, which doesn't make sense to me. It just adds unnecessary hardware. You can get a really slim profile on a Blake stitch shoe. You can get a really slim profile on a Goodyear welted shoe, but because there's no extra hardware, right off the bat, a Blake stitched shoe will a Blake stitch shoe can be a lot more sexy, a lot more slim, just a lot easier on the eyes because there's less hardware. What it also means is that a Blake stitch shoe is generally more flexible because there's less hardware, because there's less stuff in between the outsole and the upper. A Blake stitch shoe can just be more flexible. If it's just one leather sole like this, if I take this out, everyone's gonna, their shoe people are gonna look at me and go, how did you just do that? Like, I can just do that right off the bat. Like, I don't have to break this shoe in at all, and, you know, it's really no problem. There's not a whole lot of stuff there. That's, you know, those are the pros. Some of the cons that I have with Blake stitch shoes is living in upstate New York. I can't wear these as often as I can wear other pieces of footwear because if it's wet outside, if you step in a puddle and these stitches get wet, a lot of the time that water is going to seep into the insole and your feet are going to get wet. A Blake stitch shoe is just inherently less water resistant than a Goodyear welted shoe or a hand welted shoe or a Stitchdown shoe because there is, you know, direct exposure to the elements here. Is that if your stitches get wet and it steeps through into the upper and into the footbed, your foot's going to get wet. So that's really the biggest drawback that a lot of people have with a Blake stitch shoe is that it's less water resistant, which means that if you live in a place where it's super rainy or snowy or gross often, you might not want to go for a Blake stitch shoe. But if you live in like Southern California, like a Blake stitch shoe would absolutely fit the bill because it's slim, it's lean and it's slim. Oh my God. And it does exactly what you need it to do, especially in Southern California. It's sexy, it's a good-looking shoe, and it's lightweight. It's very lightweight compared to other welted footwear because there's less hardware. Big generalizations. I'm making big generalizations here. I'm not being, you know, very scientific. You can go somewhere else. Goodyear welted shoe. Okay, so this is a pair of Allen Edmonds Strand Mocks. They are Goodyear welted. They are 360-degree Goodyear welted, which means the welt goes all the way around the shoe. I have other welted pieces of footwear to show you. One of the reasons why I picked the shoe is that the welt here is very pronounced, especially compared to this day-night outsole. So this piece of leather that goes all the way around the shoe, this is a functional piece. What happens during a Goodyear welt? A Goodyear welt basically just means that a Goodyear welting machine was used to attach the welt to the shoe. So you have the upper, you have the footbed, which is inside, that's where your foot goes, the footbed, or the insole, and then you have the outsole and any other hardware. Sometimes you have a midsole, and we'll talk about that. So when a shoe is welted, whether it's Goodyear welted, whether it's hand welted, if there is a functional welt on the shoe, The insole is stitched to the welt, whether it be via a piece of fabric called gemming that is wrapped around the bottom of the footbed, or whether it be hand welted, where the welt is hand stitched to the insole and the footbed. I'm using insole and footbed interchangeably. These one takes are a little bit hard. I don't really prepare for them. I just come here and I babble. So you have the welt that's attached to the footbed, which is attached to the upper, and then you have the sole, right? These stitches that go all around here, these are functional stitches that are attaching the welt and the upper to the sole. So when your sole starts to run out, you go to a cobbler, they remove the sole, they remove the stitches from the welt, and if the welt is in good condition, they just re-stitch a new sole to the welt, and that's really about it. The reason why a lot of people contribute a Goodyear welted shoe with a quality shoe is that in order to actually create a Goodyear welted shoe, you need people who know what they're doing, you need the right equipment, and generally, because of the investment that you need to manufacture a shoe like this, the material used to make the uppers and to line the shoe if the shoe is lined and to do all of that facilitates a higher quality shoe. The shoe is not necessarily objectively better just because it's Goodyear welted. However, if a shoe is Goodyear welted, a big percentage of the time, it's probably going to be a higher quality shoe in terms of the leather used, in terms of, sustainability down the road and the ability to recraft a shoe. If the footbed of this shoe starts to go to poop, I take it to a cobbler and they can replace the footbed and they can recraft the shoe. Like, if I take care of this upper, this shoe will outlive me. I don't care what anyone says. If I take care of this upper properly, this shoe will outlive me. And that's the value of buying quality, is that it will last you a long time. If you're like me and you really love all of the little fine details and exploring this world of quality footwear, like, you can buy used shoes. I bought these shoes used and I just took care of them. I took them to the cobbler and I got a new sole on and I got a new footbed just because the shoe was previously broken in. But I bought this shoe used and I got a whole lot of stuff replaced. Boom, brand new. There's no reason not to do it sometimes. But without babbling, some pros and some cons. Because the element exposed stitching on this shoe is all outward facing, none of it's internal on the bottom of the shoe is more water resistant. It's not necessarily waterproof because, water can enter through a whole other number of facets, whether it be these stitches, whether it be, through the lining, whatever it might be. The shoe is more water resistant if you step in a puddle, for example. But if you step into like a pool wearing one of these, chances are after a little while, the shoe will start to, get wet inside. That's just the nature of leather and stitches and all of that stuff. So Goodyear welting doesn't necessarily mean that a shoe is waterproof. It just means the shoe is more water resistant, especially compared to a Blake stitch shoe. Another thing to talk about is that because there's more hardware on a Goodyear welted shoe, you're going to have more challenging break-in compared to some other footwear options. But at the end of the day, you're also going to have a little bit more comfort. On a pair of, traditionally Goodyear welted shoes, Goodyear welted shoes specifically, when the piece of fabric that goes around the insole to attach the welt, it's called the gemming. When the gemming is attached to the footbed, it leaves a cavity. And that cavity is generally filled with cork. And over time, as you wear the shoe and break the shoe in, the footbed and the cork will not only facilitate like healthy moisture wicking properties in the shoe, but it will also form to the shape of your foot. So if the width and the length of the shoe is solid, you're gonna get basically a one-to-one fit to the shape of your foot, even on the footbed, because it not only takes the shape of your foot, but it holds it. So, I will make the argument with a lot of people that over a long period of time, a quality piece of welted footwear will be infinitely more comfortable than basically anything else on the market. Unless you have some serious health issues, even then a quality piece of welted footwear could be really, really valuable. Because it maintains the shape of your foot and because the components are really conducive to being comfortable over time, it maintains its comfort. It maintains its shape, right? The leather won't warp if you treat it correctly. The leather will manage all of the moisture that's leaving your foot correctly if you treat it properly with shoe trees and you brush it and all of that stuff. Like a little bit of a side note, I have a friend who came to me with a pair of leather shoes. They were Blake stitched, but leather nonetheless. And, you know, he's like, they're uncomfortable, they're stiff, I never wear them. And that was just kind of because he threw them in his closet and they got covered in dust. So the leather dried out, the leather got stiff, the leather warped. After maybe 30 minutes, I put shoe trees in. I conditioned the leather with Saphir. Saphir is just not necessarily the best of the best, but it's really great if you just need to hydrate non-dyed leather. You know, he texted me the next day. He's like, I don't know what you did to these, but the shoes are super comfortable. I'm like, all I did was condition them. So anyway, Goodyear welting shoes doesn't necessarily mean that it's the Cadillac of shoes. A Goodyear welted shoe just means that you're like 90% of the way there to having a solid constructed shoe. Now, it doesn't necessarily need to be a dress shoe. Plenty of work shoes as well, or work boots, are welted. It's kind of this interesting juxtaposition that the nicest dress shoes in the world and some of like the most hard-wearing like logging boots out there can be constructed in the same way, because it's a matter of longevity. It's a matter of using quality materials with a quality construction to have something that will last a long time. And you know, it's heritage and it's craftsmanship and it's all of these really cool things that make me excited. So I'm a shoe nerd, everyone knows that. Okay, so I spoke about comfort, I spoke about water resistant. Look, a Goodyear welted shoe doesn't necessarily mean that the shoe is amazing. If the welt is functional, but it's made out of rubber, eventually the rubber will dry out, it will crack, and then it's moot. Like, if you're going to buy a $100 Goodyear welted shoe, which you can on Amazon, are you getting a better shoe than the same, you know, the same shoe if it was cemented? Like, maybe, you know, it depends on the components of the shoe. So just because it says Goodyear welted doesn't necessarily mean that it's better. It just means that it's probably better. Like 99% of the time, better. More quality materials used to make the upper, veg tanned leathers instead of chrome tanned leathers. There's nothing wrong with chrome tanned leathers sometimes, but for like a dress shoe specifically, I prefer veg tanned leathers. I like the way that the leather can be treated. It's just easier to maintain, in my opinion. I like the way that it ages over time. A lot of chrome tanned leathers that you might get on like a pair of Common Projects, for example, like that white leather doesn't really change color. Like, the character of that leather doesn't change over time, in my opinion. And based on what I've seen, I shouldn't say in my opinion. So, Goodyear welted shoes, hand welted shoes. What does it mean? It means that there's a functional piece of leather that goes around the shoe called a welt, and the sole is stitched to the welt. Does it mean that this shoe is the Cadillac of shoes? No. It means that this shoe was constructed in a way that kind of necessitated a higher quality materials for, you know, people looking for a shoe that'll last a long time. A welted piece of footwear is probably what you're looking for. If you're looking for something that carries a lot of history, that you'll be able to tell a lot of stories with, get a piece of welted footwear. Now, I brought this over here just to show people the difference between a piece of Stitchdown footwear and a piece of welted footwear. The outsole is stitched into the upper. So instead of the upper being folded into the shoe and then attached to the footbed, what happens is the upper is flipped out, and you can see that going all around here, and then it ends, this is probably a better angle, it ends right over here. So this is the upper that's just folded outwards and then stitched down. Stitched down, hence stitched down construction. Does it mean that this shoe is worse than this? Absolutely not. This is a fantastic shoe. The shoe is amazing. Does it mean the shoe is more water resistant than this? A little bit, kind of. It depends on the leather that's used. You know, like this mushroom chamois can accept a lot of different water before it goes bleh. That's the technical term in the industry, by the way. When leather accepts too much water and it gets sick, it goes bleh. So, I mean, I just wanted to show this to you. The construction is very similar. You have an outsole, which is this Vibram lug sole, and then you have a midsole, and then you have the upper. And the upper is stitched to the midsole, and then the midsole is stitched to the outsole. So, can I get this shoe resoled? Yes. Is it a little bit more challenging to resole in this? Maybe. It depends on the cobbler. You know, you have people who are super cocky about their work and like, this is the easiest, blah, blah, blah. It's like, okay, whatever. Clark's, right? Clark's desert shoes are made using stitch-down construction. Is it easy to resole them? No. You know, like, you can have a proper stitch down like this, or you can have like a, for lack of a better word, a garbage stitch down, like a, you know, like a pair of Clark's. It's, you know, when you buy a shoe, this is my conclusion here. When you buy a shoe, you can buy a shoe for the long run that will age over time, that you'll be able to tell stories about, that will conform to the shape of your foot, that will last forever with proper care, something that you can truly build a relationship with. I know that sounds weird, and oh my God, Harrison's talking about building a relationship with the shoes, but I can tell stories about basically all of the shoes in my closet, either because they were used and I was able to bring them back to life, or I've had them for so long, or they were like my dad's or my grandpa's, and we just so happen to have a similarly shaped foot, and like they fit me. But like, if you want a shoe that will last a lifetime more, Welted footwear, quality Stitchdown footwear exists to do just that. It exists to take you places. You know, when I was a kid, my Zeta, my grandpa used to say, Harrison, sit me down and go, Harrison, you invest in three things. You invest in the three things that separate you from the ground: your shoes, your tires, and your mattress. I don't buy winter tires. I should. My bad. I spend most of that money on shoes. I have a pretty comfortable mattress, and, you know, I have plenty of shoes to keep me going for a while. But you invest in those three things. You invest in quality tires, you invest in a quality mattress, and you invest in quality shoes. I know there are so many people who talk about minimalist footwear being this really important thing, and it's, what I don't understand is you have a lot of these companies, and I'm not going to name any companies, but what I've seen is that you have people who claim to make these like minimalist wide footbed shoes, but they have all of this foam and other crap in it, and it's like, pick one, because having both, right, having hardware in a shoe with a wide footbed and claiming that it's minimal, like, that's not helping your shoe, or that's not helping your foot inside of that shoe. So, you know, if you want to go minimalist, go minimalist. If you want to buy real, true, quality footwear that will last you forever and fits, like, that's the thing, is that, like, your shoe needs to fit, right? If the shoe doesn't fit, that's kind of where this was going, is that buy a pair of shoes that fits. Buy a pair of shoes that fits. That's my conclusion. Buy a pair of shoes that fit, and make sure that the quality, the materials on the upper is solid. Like, if you're vegan and you don't love the idea of wearing leather, I get it. Like, it's a hard sell, and it sucks, because quality leather will last way longer than any synthetic material. Like, this shoe is never going to end up in a landfill because I won't let it. Same with this, same with basically all of the shoes in my collection. A lot of babbling. Hope this video was helpful. All of my videos I babble in, but, you know, whatever. Have a happy Sunday, and thank you so much for watching. And if it's not Sunday, I hope you have a great day, or night, or whatever time it is. So, you know, if you're eating lunch, I hope you have a good lunch.